Adrian, please. I need you to come back. I'm in labor. Our daughter is coming. Where are you?
Evelyn, I told you, I'm at a birthday party. I can't just leave.
A birthday party? Adrian, I'm in the delivery room alone.
I said I'm coming. Stop panicking.
Then leave now. Please. I need you here.
My phone is dying. I'll be there soon.
Adrian? Adrian?
The night my daughter was born, my husband was not holding my hand. He was not standing beside my hospital bed. He was not even in the building. Adrian Hart was at a birthday party, while I was lying on a delivery table, fighting through the worst pain of my life, listening to nurses tell me to keep breathing, because my baby was almost here. I remember looking at the empty chair beside me more than I remember looking at the clock. That chair had been meant for my husband. I had imagined him sitting there, nervous and overwhelmed, maybe crying when he heard our daughter's first cry. Instead, it stayed empty. And what I did not know that night was that his decision to leave me would become the first piece of a truth I would spend the next several months uncovering. I thought my husband had simply made the worst mistake of his life. I was wrong. Before we continue, tell us the city you're watching from. We love seeing where our stories are reaching around the world, and if you love emotional stories filled with love, betrayal, unexpected twists, and unforgettable endings, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. My name is Evelyn Hart, and before that night, I believed I knew my husband better than anyone else in the world. Adrian and I had been married for 6 years. We met when I was 28, at a small bookstore in downtown Philadelphia, where I was searching for a book about raising children, even though I was nowhere near ready to have one. Adrian joked that I was preparing for a life I had not even started. I laughed, and somehow that conversation became dinner, then another dinner, then weekends together, and eventually a marriage. He was confident, charming, ambitious, and the kind of man who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave knowing everybody's name. I was quieter. I noticed details. I remembered promises. I believed that the small things people did when nobody was watching revealed who they truly were. For 6 years, I had collected those small things about Adrian and used them to build the picture of the man I loved. When I became pregnant, Adrian seemed genuinely happy. At least, that was what I believed. He bought a tiny white crib before I was even halfway through the pregnancy. He attended our first ultrasound. He placed his hand on my stomach whenever the baby moved, and told me that our daughter was already going to have him wrapped around her little finger. We chose the name Amelia together. I remember writing it on a piece of paper and placing it inside the drawer of her nursery because I was afraid that saying her name too much would somehow make the dream disappear. My pregnancy was not easy, but I kept telling myself that the difficult days would be worth it. Adrian worked long hours, and I understood that. He was building his career, and I wanted to be supportive. Whenever he came home late, I told myself there was a reason. Whenever he missed dinner, I told myself there would be another one tomorrow. I did not realize that I was becoming very good at explaining away the things that hurt me. 3 weeks before my due date, Adrian mentioned that his close friend, Mason Reed, was planning a birthday celebration. I remembered the name because Adrian had talked about Mason for years. Mason was one of those people who seemed to know everyone and was always surrounded by expensive cars, loud music, and people dressed as though they were attending an event instead of a birthday party. I told Adrian that I hoped he would not stay too late. My pregnancy had become physically exhausting by then. I was carrying nearly 40 pounds more than usual. My feet were swollen, and I had started waking up every night with sharp pains in my lower back. Adrian promised me he would be home early. He told me that if anything happened, he would leave immediately. I believed him because I had no reason, at that point, to believe otherwise. I even helped him choose the shirt he wore to the party. The contractions started just after 11 that night. At first, I thought they were the ordinary pains I had been experiencing for weeks. I walked around the bedroom. I drank water. I checked the clock. Then another contraction came, stronger than the first. I called Adrian. He answered after several rings. I remember telling him that I thought something was happening. I expected panic. Instead, he sounded calm. He told me to call the hospital and that he would meet me there. I remember asking him how long it would take. He said he was leaving. Those were the words I held on to as my sister drove me to the hospital. I believed Adrian was right behind us. I believed that when I arrived, he would already be on his way. I believed that my husband would never choose a party over the birth of his own child. At the hospital, everything moved quickly. The nurses checked my condition and told me that I was already several centimeters dilated. I was frightened, but there was also a strange excitement inside me. My daughter was coming. The woman who had spent 9 months imagining her was finally about to meet her. I kept looking toward the door. Every time footsteps approached, I thought Adrian had arrived. Every time the door opened, I expected to see his face. But it was never him. My sister kept trying to reassure me. She told me that he would walk through the door soon. I nodded, because I did not want anyone to see how scared I was becoming. Around 2 in the morning, I called Adrian again. He did not answer. I called again. Still nothing. I sent a message asking him where he was. There was no response. By then, the contractions were coming so close together that I could barely think between them. I remember gripping the hospital sheet and wondering whether I had done something wrong. That was the first question that entered my mind. Not why was he missing, not where he was. I wondered what I had done to make the man I married choose not to be there. At 3:17 in the morning, the doctor told me that our daughter was almost ready to come into the world. I looked toward the empty chair one more time. And for the first time in my marriage, I stopped expecting Adrian to walk through that door. I pushed, and somewhere between the pain, the fear, and the tears, I realized that I was about to become a mother whether Adrian showed up or not. When Amelia finally cried, everything inside me went quiet. They placed her against my chest, and I stared at her tiny face. She was red from crying, her dark hair damp, her little fingers opening and closing against my gown. I had imagined that moment 1,000 times, but nothing prepared me for the feeling of holding a person who had existed inside me for 9 months. I whispered her name in my mind and promised her something I had never promised anyone before. I promised that she would never have to wonder whether she mattered. I promised that she would never have to beg someone to choose her. I did not know yet that those words would eventually become a promise I needed to make to myself. Adrian arrived nearly 5 hours after Amelia was born. He did not look like a man who had just missed the birth of his first child. He looked tired. He looked annoyed. And when he walked into that room, I noticed something that I had never noticed before. There was a faint scent of expensive cologne on his jacket. I knew that cologne. It was the one he wore when he wanted to impress people. I looked at him holding our daughter for the first time, and instead of feeling relief, I felt something I could not explain. For the first time since I met him, I wondered where my husband had really been. Adrian told me that his phone had died at the party. He said he had intended to leave much earlier, but his friend had become emotional because the birthday celebration was important to him. According to Adrian, everything had happened at once. People were drinking, someone had misplaced car keys, and there had been an argument outside. He said he had been trying to help calm everyone down when his phone died. He claimed that by the time he found a charger, he already had dozens of missed calls. He said he drove to the hospital as quickly as possible. I listened to the explanation from my hospital bed while Amelia slept against my chest. I wanted to believe him. More than anything, I wanted the story to make sense because the alternative was too painful. The alternative meant that my husband knew his wife was in labor and still decided to stay somewhere else. I asked him why he had not borrowed somebody's phone. He said he had not thought of it. That answer stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary. It sounded like the kind of answer someone gives when they are trying to make a mistake seem smaller than it really was. I wanted to confront him, but I had just given birth. My body was exhausted. My emotions were everywhere. Amelia needed me every few hours, and I was learning how to hold her, feed her, change her, and understand every little expression on her face. Adrian apologized repeatedly. He told me he felt terrible. He said he would never forgive himself for missing the birth. He promised that from that moment forward, Amelia and I would always come first. I wanted to believe those words, so I did what I had done throughout our marriage. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. For the first few weeks, I tried to move forward. Adrian became attentive in a way I had not expected. He bought flowers. He brought home groceries. He took photographs of Amelia every morning. He told everyone that becoming a father had changed him. When family members asked about the delivery, I never told them the truth. I said Adrian had been delayed, I said the hospital called him. I protected him because I thought protecting our marriage meant protecting him from the consequences of one terrible night. But something had changed inside me. I had started paying attention. I noticed that Adrian kept his phone face down whenever he was around me. I noticed that he began taking calls outside. I noticed that he started using phrases like work event and client meeting more often than he used to. When I asked simple questions, he became defensive. Sometimes I caught him staring at his phone with a strange expression before quickly locking it. I told myself that new fatherhood was stressful. I told myself that I was tired. I told myself that postpartum emotions could make ordinary things feel bigger than they were. Those explanations comforted me for a while. Then I found the photograph. It happened almost 6 weeks after Amelia was born. I was cleaning the kitchen while Adrian was taking a shower. His tablet was sitting on the counter, and a notification appeared. I was not looking for anything. I did not pick up the device because I suspected him. The photograph simply appeared on the screen. It was from Mason's birthday. There were more than 20 people in the picture. Adrian was standing near the center. He was smiling, and beside him was a woman I had never seen before. Her name was Claire Whitmore. I knew that because the photograph had been posted publicly. What made my stomach tighten was not that Adrian was standing beside her. It was his hand. His hand was resting gently against the small of her back. Not casually. Not accidentally. Intimately. I stared at the photograph for several seconds. Then I noticed the timestamp. It had been taken at 2:46 in the morning. That was almost an hour before Amelia was born. My hands became cold. I opened the photograph again. I zoomed in. Adrian was wearing the same shirt he had worn when he finally came to the hospital. The same jacket. The same watch. The same expression. I remembered him telling me his phone had died. I remembered him saying he had been dealing with an argument outside. But in that photograph, he did not look like a man dealing with chaos. He looked happy, and Claire Whitmore was looking at him as though she already knew him. I did not confront him that night. That decision has stayed with me, because I used to think courage meant asking difficult questions immediately. Sometimes courage is sitting quietly and allowing the truth to reveal itself. I began looking more carefully. I discovered that Claire had attended several events connected to Adrian's company. I discovered that Mason knew her. I discovered that she had appeared in photographs with Adrian months before I had ever heard her name. I discovered that she was not a random person at a birthday party. She was the daughter of one of Adrian's biggest business partners. That discovery changed everything. Because Adrian had never mentioned her. Not once. I started wondering whether the birthday party had really been the reason he stayed away from the hospital. Then I found something worse. A receipt. It was from a restaurant across town. The date was the night Amelia was born. The time was 1:38 in the morning. 2 meals. A bottle of expensive champagne, and a reservation under Adrian's name. The restaurant was only 12 minutes from the birthday venue. I stared at that receipt for a long time. My husband had told me he had been surrounded by people at the party, but the receipt suggested that at some point that night, he had left. And he had not been alone. I felt something inside me break. It was not my heart. Not yet. It was my certainty. The certainty that I had married the man I thought I had married. That night, after Adrian went to sleep, I sat beside Amelia's crib. She was breathing softly. Her tiny chest rose and fell beneath the blanket. I looked at her and realized that I had been trying to save a marriage that she had never asked to be born into. For the first time, I asked myself a question that terrified me. What if the night Adrian missed Amelia's birth had not been a mistake? What if it had been a choice? I began investigating my own marriage. That is the simplest way I can describe it. I was not trying to destroy Adrian. I was trying to understand him. Every morning, I would wake up, take care of Amelia, make breakfast, and pretend everything was normal. Then, when Adrian left for work, I would begin putting pieces together. I looked through old photographs. I checked dates. I remembered conversations. I compared what Adrian had told me with what I could verify. I discovered that Claire Whitmore had been connected to Adrian for almost a year before Amelia was born. At first, I thought the relationship was romantic. Then I found something that confused me. Claire was not Adrian's secret girlfriend. She was connected to his business in a way I had never been told about. Adrian had been negotiating a major investment with her father. That explained some things, but it did not explain the restaurant receipt. It did not explain the photograph, and it certainly did not explain why Adrian had lied about where he was that night. I needed answers, so I looked at the birthday party again. The photograph had been posted by someone named Jordan Blake, another friend of Mason's. Jordan had uploaded dozens of photographs that night. I went through everyone. There was Adrian at 11:52. There was Adrian at 12:18. There was Adrian at 12:41. Then there was a gap. The next photograph showed him at 2:46. He was standing beside Claire. That gap lasted more than 2 hours. 2 hours in which nobody seemed to know where Adrian was. Except perhaps Claire. I found another photograph. This one had been taken inside the restaurant. Adrian was sitting across from Claire. The timestamp was 1:41, the same time as the receipt. I stared at the image until my eyes hurt. Then I noticed something on the table. A folder. The kind of folder used for business documents. I realized then that I had been looking at the wrong mystery. Maybe Adrian had not gone to the restaurant for another woman. Maybe he had gone there to negotiate something. But why had he hidden it? The answer came 2 days later. Adrian had been planning to sell our house. I discovered the paperwork in a folder inside his office. The house was not technically listed yet, but the documents were prepared. The strange part was the proposed buyer. It was a company connected to Claire's father. Our home had been purchased before our marriage. It had been my grandmother's property before she passed away, and although Adrian had contributed to renovations, I had always considered it the one thing in my life that could never be taken away. The documents suggested otherwise. Adrian had been trying to restructure the property ownership. I felt sick. I realized that the birthday party might have been connected to something much larger. I kept searching, and eventually I found the email. It was buried inside an old account Adrian had forgotten to log out of. The email was from Claire. It was short. It mentioned the investment. It mentioned the property. And it mentioned me. Claire wrote that Adrian needed to handle Evelyn before the closing. I read that sentence again. Then again, handle Evelyn. I was not a problem. I was his wife. But in that email, I was something standing in the way. I finally confronted Adrian. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I simply asked him why he had been trying to sell our home. He went completely still. That was the moment I knew. Whatever explanation he had prepared, he had not prepared for that question. He told me it was complicated. I asked him why he had been with Claire at the restaurant. He said it was business. I asked him why he had lied about it. He said he had been afraid I would misunderstand. I asked him why he had stayed away from the hospital while I was giving birth. He had no answer. That silence told me more than any confession could have. For months, I had been wondering why my husband chose a birthday party over the birth of his child. The truth was more painful. He had left the party because he was negotiating a deal. He had gone to the restaurant with Claire because the deal involved our house, and he had decided that whatever he was doing was more important than being beside me. But there was still one piece missing. Why did he need our house? I eventually found out Adrian's company was in serious financial trouble. He had hidden the losses from me. The investment with Claire's father was supposed to rescue him, but the deal required collateral. Our home. The house where I had planned to raise Amelia. The house where I had imagined celebrating her birthdays. The house where I had believed our family would grow old. Adrian had been willing to risk it without telling me, and the birthday party had been the meeting point for the people involved. The restaurant meeting was where the final terms were discussed. That was why he stayed. Not because the party mattered more than Amelia. Because he believed the deal mattered more than both of us. That realization hurt differently. Infidelity would have been devastating. But discovering that your husband could calculate the value of your home, your security, and your child's future without considering your feelings was another kind of betrayal. I had spent years believing Adrian was ambitious. I realized he was willing to gamble with everything we had built. And then I found the final document. It showed that he had already signed an agreement. My signature had been forged. I stared at my name on that page. It looked like mine, but it was not mine. That was when I stopped crying, because suddenly this was no longer only about my marriage. It was about protecting my daughter. And for the first time since I met Adrian, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed to leave. Leaving Adrian was not as simple as packing a suitcase. There was a baby. There was a house. There were legal documents. There were financial accounts. There were years of shared memories, and there was the terrifying realization that the person I had trusted most had already taken steps to protect himself at my expense. I contacted an attorney. I gathered every document I could find. I made copies of the emails. I saved the photographs. I secured the property records. I documented the forged signature. For the first time in months, I stopped trying to understand Adrian emotionally and started protecting myself practically. The woman who had sat in that delivery room waiting for her husband was still inside me somewhere. But she was changing. I was becoming someone who no longer needed another person's decision to determine her worth. Adrian eventually realized that I knew everything. He tried to explain. He said he had been desperate. He said his company was failing. He said he believed the investment would save our future. He said he thought he could fix everything before I ever found out. I listened, and for the first time, I heard his words without trying to make them kinder than they were. He had not protected our future. He had protected himself. The distinction mattered. The legal process took months. The forged agreement was challenged. The house remained in my control. Adrian's company collapsed shortly afterward. The investment he had been chasing never materialized. Claire's father withdrew from the negotiations once the legal issues became public. The birthday party that had seemed so important that night became nothing more than a footnote in the story of my life. But the delivery room never became a footnote. I still remember that empty chair. I remember the fluorescent lights. I remember looking at the door. I remember thinking that maybe I was not important enough for my husband to come. Years later, I understood that his absence had never been a measurement of my value. It had been a measurement of his character. That distinction saved me. Adrian and I eventually divorced. There was no dramatic courtroom confrontation. There was no final speech that magically repaired everything. There was simply a series of decisions, one document after another, one signature after another, one door closing, and then, one morning, I woke up in a small apartment with Amelia sleeping beside me, sunlight coming through the curtains, and I realized I was no longer afraid. I had lost the marriage I thought I would have for the rest of my life. But I had not lost myself. Amelia grew up knowing that she was loved. She grew up knowing that her mother would choose her. And as she got older, I became more comfortable telling her the truth in an age-appropriate way. I never told her that her father was a monster, because he wasn't. He was a human being who made selfish choices. And I learned that people do not have to be monsters to hurt you deeply. Sometimes they are simply people who choose themselves when choosing you would have required sacrifice. Years after the divorce, I returned to the hospital where Amelia was born. I did not go because I was searching for closure. I went because I wanted to remember who I had been. I stood outside the delivery room where I had once waited for Adrian. The chair was gone. The room had been renovated. The walls were different. The nurses were different. Everything had changed. But I remembered. I remembered the fear. I remembered the loneliness. And I remembered the moment Amelia cried for the first time. That was the moment I understood something I had missed for years. I had not been alone. I had been becoming a mother. While I was waiting for Adrian to arrive, Amelia was already there. While I was wondering whether my husband had chosen me, my daughter had already chosen life. While I was looking at an empty chair, there was a tiny person resting against my chest who would eventually teach me that love should never require me to abandon myself. I used to think the worst thing Adrian did was leave me in that delivery room. Now I know it was also the moment that forced me to see my life clearly. If he had walked through that door at midnight, maybe I would have continued ignoring the signs. If he had held my hand during the birth, maybe I would have trusted every explanation afterward. If he had acted like the husband I believed he was, I might never have discovered what he was doing with our home. His absence hurt me. But it also revealed him. And sometimes the truth enters your life through the wound you never wanted. Today, Amelia is old enough to understand the story. She knows that her father was not there when she was born. She knows that I was scared. She knows that I cried. But she also knows something much more important. She knows that the first person who held her never let go. I did not get the birth story I had imagined. I did not get the husband I thought I married. I did not get the perfect family photograph. but I got something I had not known I needed. I got the courage to stop begging someone to value what I already knew was valuable. My daughter, my home, my peace, my life. And when I think about that night now, I no longer remember the empty chair first. I remember Amelia. I remember the moment they placed her against my chest. I remember looking at her tiny face and making a promise. I promised her that she would never have to question whether she mattered. Eventually, I realized that promise was not only for her, it was for me too, because for years, I had been asking the wrong question. I kept asking why Adrian did not choose me. The better question was why I had spent so long waiting for him to choose me, when I already had the power to choose myself. That night, my husband left the delivery room to attend a birthday party. He thought he was leaving a wife behind. He did not realize he was leaving behind the woman who had trusted him completely. The woman who walked out of that hospital was different. She was a mother. She was frightened. She was heartbroken. But she was no longer willing to disappear inside someone else's choices. And that woman was me, Evelyn Hart. I lost a marriage that night, but I found my voice. I found my daughter. And eventually, I found myself. Sometimes the person who walks away from you believes they are leaving you with nothing. They do not understand that sometimes their absence is the very thing that gives you permission to build a life they can no longer control. And that is what I did. I built mine. Not because Adrian failed me, but because, after everything he had done, I finally understood that my life was never supposed to depend on whether he stayed. If you were Evelyn, would you have forgiven Adrian after everything he did, or would you have walked away for good? Tell me honestly in the comments. And if this story reminded you that sometimes losing someone can be the beginning of finding yourself again, share this video with someone who may need to hear that message. Subscribe for more emotional stories about love, betrayal, family, and the moments that change our lives forever. And remember, sometimes the person who leaves you behind is unknowingly giving you the freedom to become who you were always meant to be.